Hey guys, what is up? AwesomeTheSauce here. Hope you guys are having a great day and welcome to a very exciting video. Today we're going to be talking about an extremely unexpected change that Wizard101 put out today, and that is they changed a whole ass spell. I'm talking about Inferno Salamander. Now this spell is very different today than it was yesterday, and honestly, I feel like it wasn't expected. I mean, this is like an actual hotfix. I don't think we've gotten one of these in literally like a month. But I thought I would talk about what the actual change is. It's more than just one change, actually. It's more than what you already just see in front of you. But even more importantly, I'm going to be talking about how I think it's going to affect PvP. Without further ado, let's get right into what in the world just happened this morning. Obviously, the first thing that they did this morning in this change was that the damage is now just an overtime without an initial hit. Now, obviously, this is much worse than something that hits even slightly and then does an overtime attached to it. That's just because at the end of the day, a shield is just much better against this spell than it used to be. Before, a shield was kind of not a good move against a fire, simply because if they used the old version of Inferno Salamander, they were just getting a lot of damage, right? There's that small little 200 hit that honestly does a little bit, and then the 600 overtime, that's guaranteed 600 overtime if you have a follow-up, because having a follow-up makes a triage a bad move. Every time you whipped out a tower shield against a fire, it was probably a move that gained them around as long as they played well. As long as they infouled and bladed to gain pips, a shield was actually a bad move, simply because the previous version of Inferno Salamander, like something that did an initial hit and then did an overtime, it just gained the Fire Wizard so many rounds on you because you chose to shield. So now, shielding actually guarantees that you remove a third of the damage, and also it makes a spell like Triage much better. It makes the entire 6 pips of that Inferno Salamander simply not worth it. So I can expect that Triage, and obviously Shift from Myth, it's going to make this spell probably a very situational spell at best. I think the type of damage that you were able to do in simply one round, and the fact that an overtime with a follow-up when it had an initial hit is just simply so good. Like, in comparison, this is nothing. The other obvious change is that, let's say that your opponent has like 1000 HP. A shield actually did not used to matter when you were fire, because you would break the initial, do a third of your overtime, and do basically 1000 damage as long as you had like one buff. So now, you can't use this as a finisher either, which makes this a much more situational spell. Now, there are some good things and bad things that come out of this for fire, and I think the big elephant in the room, in my opinion, is how is this going to affect the extent to which people ward to fire. Keep in mind that this is a pretty thorough audit of the spell, right? If you have the TC version, it's actually no PvP. So right now, if you want something that does an initial hit and then does some kind of big overtime, the closest spells that fire currently has to that are Fire Elf, and maybe, just maybe, Burning Rampage. So because fire has basically so much less offensive input, it really raises a question, in my opinion. Is Fire Ward a good choice on a Storm Wizard, for example? Because right now, I'm thinking of Fire and Death Ward on every school, simply because of the Drains being really good on Death, and simply because Inferno Salamander being really good on Fire. Once these Fire Wards are out, I think what we're gonna see probably, if I had to guess, are literally just Death Wards replacing the Fire Ward a lot, and also just extra damage, extra armor breaker talents, extra pierce, right? Extra stats that you normally wouldn't see because people were so scared of Inferno Salamander. I think that makes this change very exciting in some ways for fire, because right now there is really no point going for a Scion, because think about it, right? A Scion does 2000 damage. If you enchanted this and did 2 of them for literally 1 more pip, you're doing way more damage. And considering that most people were fire warded because of this spell, you couldn't even do this through a shield because so much of the damage was taken away. Another very interesting spell that I genuinely don't think has gotten enough love this update is Infernal Oni, right? This is also a spell, right? Like right now, like a lot of people don't use it, because if this were the original version of it and it did that initial hit, if you enchanted this with Solar Surge, you were always doing basically the same damage as this for 1 less pip. But now, because this is not as good of a spell, you might actually see Oni's Forge into the Infernal Oni becoming more and more of a move. Now, obviously, Oni's Forge requires a set shield or 2 tower shields, so it's not an obviously good move at all times, but I could see it being a thing. A lot of people still use volcanic shields. Could be a very, very good counter that currently doesn't exist. Also, if fewer people ward, you'll see a huge rise, in my opinion, of people just using Fire Dragon instead of Inferno Salamander. And if I'm being very honest, guys, I think out of all the things that I've talked about, right, using Oni instead and Scion instead of Inferno Salamander, using Burning Rampage to make a substitute for it, of all of these strategies that might be still a thing for Fire, I think Dragon is going to be the one that a lot of people do, because it is the one that still resembles an overtime the most. It does mean that you might need pip conserve, but I don't really think that's hard for most Fire Wizards. The other thing that I'm really, really happy that they did, and honestly, I don't know why this took them so long, because I think this was honestly a simpler fix. The Spellman upgrade finally doesn't add like 40 damage. It's a lot less now, and it honestly doesn't like go like crazy as time goes on, right? Like, for example, to go from tier 4 to tier 5 is only a 15 damage increase, so it's really, really little. And the other thing is, it's not as high as the increases were, right? But before, if you tiered up an Inferno Salamander, it was at least 40 damage a tier. Now the most you get is the 30 damage on the first one, and then it degrades a little bit to 25, and then it goes back up to 30 again for some reason, but then it degrades again to 15. What this means is, yes, there are rewards for doing Beast Moon, obviously. I plan on doing Beast Moon for Monster Mash this time around, and maybe even for Stormwing, Obsidian Colossus. I think those are interesting things to look at. But unlike other, you know, unlike the, in comparison to other Spellmans, right, this isn't broken anymore. It literally used to be broken how easily you could upgrade it and for how much damage. You were basically getting like a free Solar Surge enchant just for tiering it up from 1 to 5. Now, I've talked about all the alternatives that Fire can have. I've talked about the fact that maybe people won't ward. Let's talk about whether this is actually too much of a nerf, right? I think there is one negative thing about this, and that's that this seems like a continuation of something that I've really noticed seems to be like the solution to a lot of problems. It's either make it too good or make it almost useless. I don't think this really addresses the root of the issue here, and it's simply the fact that when you have like a 5 or 6 pip overtime, it just simply is a very, very good spell because of the fact that Solar Surge is so high on it, right? So things like Frostbite, things like, I guess, Burning Rampage, things like Inferno Salamander, those spells are always going to be overtuned for the school if they're allowed to have 25% more damage by virtue of being a damage overtime spell. I think looking into the rule that spells that are damage overtimes are 30% or 25% to 30% better damage, I think that's something they got to look at. I'm not saying it needs to be lower or even the same. I just think 20% is quite a bit extra just for being a damage overtime. Yes, a damage overtime, you can reduce the damage as it hits you. I totally get that. 20% is a lot, especially for a school like Fire, especially for schools that do a lot of damage, because that really, really multiplies. That little extra damage, it multiplies a lot. I think Fire is going to be a lot worse than it used to be, but I do think that's going to make people ward less, and it's going to make people who are willing to do strategies outside of Salamander and Heffy, I feel like it's actually going to give them a shot to maybe come up with something, and that's what I'm excited for. I'm hoping that Fire is not, like, useless. I think there is a high chance that it's a lot less, like, you know, I feel like it's going to be a lot less clean. You know, before the plan was simple, right? You would just do the same thing over and over again, and I'm glad that they nerfed something that was so predictable and yet consistently stupidly good in PvP. I'm glad that they did that. I'm hoping that the other things that are left are enough to let Fire shine. Nobody knows the answer to this because people were too busy spamming the same spell. Now we'll really see what Fire's all about. It's definitely a mixed bag for Fire. I would not want to be a Fire main right now because this is a big nerf. It is. There's no other way to look at it. But I'm hoping that there are ways to look around. I hope Fire Ward dies out. And I'm hoping that this school becomes fun to play because right now I have not been playing Fire simply because people are like 85 to 90 resist on the regular. Let me know what you guys think of this change, especially if you're a Fire Wizard or if you've been struggling against Fire. Do you like this change? Do you guys think it's too much? Do you guys think that they could have just nerfed the Spellmans and not the damage? Or maybe they should have nerfed the damage but not the Spellmans? I don't know. Like, there's a lot of ways to look at it. Let me know in the comments. Drop a like if you enjoyed and leave a sub if you're new. As always, if somebody has not told you you're awesome today, they're doing something wrong. So stay awesome. And yeah.